Okay, so number 4, let's just take. So right up here, oh, Kayla's already on board. Look at that overachiever. Just wanted to get that knocked out. No, I expected some of you would work ahead. If you get in a roll and you got enough time, especially chapter 3 was such a baby chapter, you might a little. Yeah, it was hard. So, in your opinion, what were the 2 most important things discussed, right? So that's kind of two important things. It's not necessarily a quote; it could be a concept. Why are these things important to you? And how can this information be applied to future circumstances you may face in the future? So you can kind of think, if I was going to be doing Robinhood, or I used to do Robinhood, but I ain't doing Robinhood no more, or I'm not doing single stocks, or, so I want you guys kind of thinking about, because these are really tangible concepts, and I kind of want you to see putting into words a few, and it doesn't have to be, I'm not looking for a paper here or anything, just a few sentences or whatever on applying it to yourself. So, okay, any questions on that? So each chapter, it's the same thing. So each chapter has the 2 most important things.
I do have a question. When a company is private, when will you know? You get like notified when they go public, about it stuff.
Yeah, they do advertise. So like especially somebody like Facebook. But if you wanted to keep tabs on that, there's probably data things that'll say when initial public offerings are coming out. See, because they want the public to know they're going public. So that's part of Goldman Sachs' job, is to advertise. Hey, we're going public with the stock. It's the greatest stock ever. Look at the management team. We've got a Harvard guy. We've got a person from Ottawa University that's managing the portfolio. Whatever. They're going to talk it up. Harvard and Ottawa, right hand in hand with each other and pedigrees. So yes, that stuff is out there. Okay, so I wanted to start off today with a video. I'm going to be showing a decent amount of short videos. This chapter, again, is kind of a reading comprehension chapter. We'll do a little bit of stuff on the board, but with these regulations, so actually, I just remembered I was going to do short selling before I did this, so that's what we're going to do. Let me get this video queued up here. Yeah, we're going to learn what short selling is in kind of more detail. I think a lot of you probably have the concept, but all right, I'm not going to. FDIC. All right. See. Okay. Let's do, so this is something for your notes now. So pull out the stuff at the table and get your notes too. But, all right, what is short selling? If you had to describe it, what would be, not in super detail, but if you're taking a short position, what are you kind of doing? Jacob?
You sell the stock that you don't have expecting the price to drop.
You are expecting the price to drop, yes. And so how do you sell something you don't have is kind of what's weird with the short sale. So with the long, let's go over the long position. Long position is a good old fashioned. I buy Tesla today. I hold Tesla for 30 days. At the end of 30 days, if I bought Tesla at $100 and it's now $120, I sell Tesla and I have a gain, a capital gain that's taxable, by the way, of $20 if it was a short-term hold. So I made a profit off Tesla by holding it, buy low, sell high. That's the normal kind of long position that most people think about investing. So in the short sale, JC?
You buy car shares, you short that, and people will buy it at car price.
Okay, so yeah, you're getting into the borrowing aspect of it. So yeah, you're gonna, if the long position, let's write this in our notes first. So let's put, I guess, what is short selling? And this is going to be talked about in the, especially chapter 5 of the Skousen book that's due Thursday. So that's why I wanted to give you guys a little heads up of this. So first of all, a long position, if you're going long on a stock, buy low, sell high. And a short position is sell high, buy low, which seems pretty weird. Sell high, buy low, even if that's something you don't have. So the question that it raises is, how do you sell something you don't actually own yet? It's like, I want to buy it in reverse. I think the stock's going to go down from $100 to $50, so I want to buy it tomorrow. How can I undo this? How can I unravel it? So that's what we're going to do here. So imagine we got some IBM stock, and today it's worth $100, and you think it will fall tomorrow to $50. So perfect time to take a short position. All right, so the first thing we need to do is look at how the stock market works with a brokerage. So in the middle of your page, we've got the broker, or the stockbroker. And the broker is going to hold client shares of stock. So they've got all kinds of stocks in their inventory. So they have a bunch of clients. So these are other clients who with IBM stock. And so we've got, this guy, these are real human beings over here that are clients of the business, a whole bunch of them, and they all have varying shares. And so the broker has these shares on file because they're a registered agent that the United States government can track and look at SEC and filings and all that jazz. So they're going to hold all of these shares. So these are the actual shares. Stock certificates, if you want to think of it that way. It's all digital now anyway, but shares of IBM. And this is the broker acting as an agent for these real people over here. Make sense so far? They're going to hold these shares. All right, so now you come along and you want to share. And so the broker's holding on to these things. They're not really doing anything. They're just sitting there in inventory. And so the government allows these to be rented out, essentially. They can be loaned out. They're all fungible, which means that one share of stock can be another share of stock. So we can loan out these to a short seller. So here's you over here, and you are the short seller. And the short seller is going to borrow one of the shares. So it's kind of like renting. You got to pay it back, but you're literally borrowing the share of stock. And it's going to go out of inventory here. Now, it sounds like that's kind of a risky thing to do. I mean, what if we have a bank run like we talked about last time, and everybody, all the depositors come to the broker now to say, I want my share of IBM. What does the broker need to do if they don't have all the shares because they let some of them go? They used to have 40, but now they only have 20, and everybody wants to dump IBM. What does the broker need to do? They need to buy it back, right? So they need to buy back the IBM stock from the market. So the market's over here. There's still lots of shares of IBM stock to make, but they have to make these guys whole. You see how it doesn't really matter. They can always make good, but there's a little bit of a risk if IBM stock, if they want to sell today, then they're going to have to go, and there might be a little bit of a risk of what it's at today between now this guy and the broker and what the broker had to do today in today's market. Okay, and then that gets taken care of with market. margin accounts, which we'll cover later. So there's a little bit of risk there with that. So anyway, so he borrows the share, and then what's he going to do is he's going to sell it today. So the short seller sells it at $100, today's price. Okay, so now if we were doing a little Professor Wagner accounting here with some debits and credits, or assets and liabilities anyway. So assets and liabilities of the short seller, so this is the short seller's balance sheet. Then today, the balance sheet is the seller has $100 in cash from the sale of the stock and has a liability of 1 share of IBM. Right, we sold the share, but we created an instant liability of, hey, I owe a share back to the broker from the short sale. So we're borrowing that share and making that happen. Okay, so that's kind of the nature of the sale. If there's any dividends coming out of it while the short seller holds, the short seller could be taking this position over 1 year or something, right? It could be a longer period of time. So if a dividend's declared or something, of course, these guys need to pay back. These are still possibly paying dividends. And if that's the case, when he borrowed the rent, he's going to owe the dividend back. So there might be a little bit of accounting with dividends if that's applicable. Most stocks don't have dividends, so that's not a big deal, but that would all be taken care of as well. All right, so then how do we actually make money as the short seller? So tomorrow comes, and lo and behold, the short seller's right. IBM tanked. It's at $50. What does he need to do? Buy the share back, right? So now tomorrow comes. Maybe I should put this in green since we're making some money. So now tomorrow comes. And we have to buy the share back, so we're going to be minus $50. And then, of course, we got rid of that liability, so 0 shares liability. But I had 100 in my account, so I'm technically, I still have $50 left in my account. And that's my profit then off the short sale. I've made whole. I returned the share, and I got $50 left in my brokerage account. Okay, so questions on that? Now, it sounded like JC knew this. How many other people knew how this worked? Okay, Liz did a little, Eddie was a little iffy on it. So it's kind of nice to know a little bit of these details. Now you start to see the linkages of moral hazard, adverse selection, why the SEC, or do we need monitoring? Do we trust the broker to make all this happen? You start to see the level of trust that's needed to make more and more of these transactions and more efficient. But short selling in general is a good thing. Why? Why is short selling good? JC?
Higher reward.
What's that?
Higher reward.
Higher reward. Okay, that could be, but is it higher risk? Yeah, once we get into the margin accounts, it turns out there's, we'll put it this way. If you do a long position on IBM and you're hoping it's going to go up to 120, but it actually goes down to 0. IBM goes out of business and it's worth nothing. How much did you lose? If you bought it for 100 and it goes to 0, you lost $100. Now, if you're in a short position, how much can you lose? Infinite. You always have to keep making up the difference in the short position because you always have to pay back the share. And as it approaches infinite or low, you bought it for 100, and then you have to pay back that share. So you have Unlimited losses, again, without explaining margin accounts, it's kind of hard to see, but we'll do that later. But you have to keep making up the deficiency with the short position.
So
Yeah.
The thing with GameStop, could people short sell that right now?
Yeah, probably people should short sale it. Now, here's the, but you gotta have knowledge of why. But you're right. If the stock seems irrationally high because of some bubble or some weird thing, that's exactly. And so when I said why is short positions, are they good or bad? I didn't really mean for a specific investor. There might be more risk. It might be good or bad. But for market efficiency, it's really good. So now if the short sellers start piling on GameStop and we have this irrational bubble going up, if the short sellers jump in, does that make the bubble go down? Does it make it go down faster or up faster? If a bunch of short sellers come on, what did he do here? It's going to go down, right? So from an economist perspective, and in terms of market efficiency, markets are most efficient if you have people on both sides betting against something. Some people think it's going to fall, some think, and that's what the rational market hypothesis that we did before with efficient markets said, is that we're going to squeeze out all the real information so that the stock price is really reflecting the fair price, which means there's just as many people on the opposite side that think GameStop's going to go down versus those people that think GameStop's going to go up. And so as more and more knowledge comes in that GameStop's going to crash, more and more short sellers come in, and it causes the market to correct itself faster, right? It corrects itself faster, and that's better in terms of efficiency in markets. So that's the importance of short selling kind of from a pricing standpoint. Okay, any other questions there? Yeah, or comments?
Short sell GameStop today.
Well, perhaps, I don't know. You better dig into some information and learn why it's up. But a short position on GameStop might be a possibility. I don't know. All right, so let's do a little follow-up on our FDIC, and we talked about camels last time. Oh. Short video. So, I don't know, he's getting kind of old now. Gosh, I'm going to draw a blank on his hand. Picture his face perfectly. A former student of mine, his mom was pretty high up at the FDIC. And so when he was taking this class, she came in, actually I remember her name was Karen, but so she came in and talked to the class about the FDIC, and she actually showed this video along, she gave a physical presentation to the class. It was really interesting with what the FDIC does. So we're gonna watch that same video here.
There are few ironclad guarantees in life, but here's one. Federal Deposit Insurance. Americans have counted on it since 1934. In those days, the insured deposit limit was just $2,500. Today, it's 100 times that. But the promise is the same. Whenever you put money into FDIC insured deposit accounts and stay within coverage limits, that money is 100% protected, no matter what happens to the bank or the economy. That's some guarantee to keep for more than 75 years. Here's how the FDIC is able to do it. Deposit insurance is exactly that, insurance. But unlike an auto or home policy, the consumer doesn't pay the premiums. Banks and savings institutions do. The FDIC is funded by the banking industry, not taxpayer money. The premiums go into the deposit insurance fund. And as with any insurance, the higher the risk, the higher the premium. But what happens in times when bank failures are high and the fund is frequently tapped to protect depositors? There have been times when the fund has had a negative balance, even when it had abundant resources. This is because the FDIC is required to set aside a contingent reserve for probable failures over the next 12 months. The higher the projected failures, the greater that reserve must be. Since the FDIC is not allowed to offset that cost by future income, the net result on paper is a negative fund balance, even though total resources are positive. But whatever the fund balance, it does not affect the FDIC's ability to protect depositors when banks fail. The FDIC has access to considerable cash from many sources. Besides the money currently in the Deposit Insurance Fund, the FDIC receives quarterly premiums from the banking industry. It can also assess banks special fees and require them to pay premiums in advance. Then there are the unsold assets from failed banks. As these are sold, the proceeds are converted to cash. In 2009, the FDIC collected $10.2 billion in regular assessment revenues, plus another $5.6 billion in a special assessment. And at the end of the year, it required insured institutions to prepay 3 years' worth of insurance premiums. That raised another $46 billion. Based on current projections, the amount on hand will be more than sufficient to handle bank failures from the financial crisis that began in 2008. The FDIC is committed to doing everything possible to be solely funded by the banking industry and would only seek public funds as a last resort. In such an unlikely event, the FDIC has a $100 billion line of credit with the U.S. Treasury. And then there's the ultimate reassurance. The FDIC is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. No matter what the future brings, the FDIC will continue to be a symbol of confidence for America's banking public.
Okay, so now this is the FDIC, and my question to
Even
you
though the
is
higher the premiums in
what they're
advance,
doing, what's the connection between what they're doing and what we learned with capital adequacy?
the FDIC also assess banks special for money currently in the Deposit Insurance Fund. The
One
FDIC
picture, let me
receives
see if I
quarterly
can.
premiums from the banking
Oh,
industry.
I'm wasting
It
time.
can also assess banks special fees.
This is the one right here.
Impossible to be
Right here. Picture one. How are these guys different than this guy? What are the similarities in terms of, we did the camels. What was the camels? What was the acronym?
Capital adequacy.
Capital adequacy with C.
Asset quality.
Asset quality. Management. Earnings. Liquidity. Sensitivity to risk. So what you just learned about the FDIC was what? How did they be solid so that they don't have to rely on somebody's blue screening?
I thought a bomb was about to go off.
Tabs again, you're gonna lose a point. I don't know what the hell that was, but no. Okay, so how does the FDIC keep its fingers out of taxpayer money?
They take money from banks, it looks like.
Okay, so the banks are paying premiums,
Yeah.
but it's an insurance policy, right? It's not the Federal Reserve. How is the Federal Reserve different than the FDIC? What does the Federal Reserve do? The central bank of the United States, it has a relationship with these banks too. What do they have to do? The tools of the Fed. Think about the tools of the Fed. What do banks have to do with its relationship to the Fed? Keep a portion, very good. So the required reserves, right? So you have to hold back, you can't loan it out. But they're not paying premiums. So this is functioning more like a real insurance policy, right? Not being the banker's bank in terms of loans and reserves. So that's something to be important. And so I think there's kind of a connection here between the capital adequacy of the FDIC, which was done by what? What did you see in the video? How do we make sure they're not having to dip into taxpayer money? What were some things that the video said what they are doing to make sure they keep solvent, basically?
They keep a certain amount.
Yes. So that certain amount, that contingent reserves, right? is literally a bundle of very liquid assets. They're not showing all the details, but it could be government bonds or something, or money sitting in accounts. So very liquid amount, and they can't go below that. What does that sound like in terms of our banking balance sheet, our banker's balance sheet?
Can't go below the required reserves.
No. Because that's the connection with the central bank,
Okay.
right? But in terms of our camels, what was the C? Capital adequacy, which would be what in terms of our balance sheet? Equity. So that's different. And then I didn't mean to be so harsh on you there, Luke.
You're good.
But
I'm gonna cry.
so possibly those reserves are different than the owner's equity, right? And so here we're really talking about equity that's not being loaned out, right? This contingent reserve fund is not being loaned out. It can go negative even though it still has a bunch of cash in it. But they try to keep it at that level, and it's kind of a quasi-government agency, but it's this close to being run as a private organization. And we'll see this come up in the next book when we start the Allison book next week. Does it have to be government sanctioned or can it be privately run? This is close to being a private solution. Imagine this is just a private nonprofit cooperative where banks are cooperating with this entity. It doesn't necessarily have to have government oversight if there's enough transparency and accountability among the member banks. So this is where we get into that private-public. Do I have to turn to government for everything, or is this an example of where it's actually kind of close to a private solution with the premiums? All right, so banks then are on the regulatory side of the Fed, and they're told how much capital adequacy to be holding, and that lever goes up and down with regulations. Financial crisis hits, capital adequacy goes up. Over time, the economy's going great. Why can't I loan out this money? Lobby my politicians, get that capital adequacy down, because they'd rather loan that money out and make more money on it if that's possible to get more leverage.
Say FDIC did go public, what would be the bank's incentive to actually pay those premiums?
Well, and that's what I meant by a nonprofit type situation. So in order to be a bank, there still could be laws that say, you have to be a part of a system that has backing like this. Or in like some real big free market economists, which I'm real close to that, might say, if we don't have the insurance policy, then would you want to bank at this bank who's not a member of this guy, knowing that you've got that insurance? No, right? And so this guy wouldn't have any customers.
Yeah, they'd have to get.
Right, and so they'd have to join the club or the group in order to garner more deposits. So the market might figure out that solution on its own.
Yeah.
And maybe we can look for solutions like that. And that's kind of what deregulation does in some cases, is let's take away this and this. It doesn't mean Wild West and just let everything go, but it might be slowly taking away some things. Okay, any other questions or comments on that video? All right, got one more and then we'll wrap up Dodd-Frank anyway. Okay, we had two ways that the FDIC went into if a bank was in trouble. What were those two ways that I did last time? I wrote them on the board.
Say that again, please.
What was the process when a bank's going under?
Camel.
The camels is part of the audit, but if the bank is actually going under,
Liquidate.
liquidate, which was the purchase, right?
Yeah, and last resort.
You're kind of giving the explanation, but not the two names. So what were the two names? Say it again. No. If you guys wrote them down or not. We had two methods.
One of them was like
Purchase and, you all said it. There's
payoff
something-
method and purchase.
The payoff method and
Purchase and assumption.
purchase and assumption. So those are two ways that the FDIC steps in to correct it. They can basically liquidate it, which is kind of close to a bankruptcy, or they can do this purchase and assumption. So this is going to be the resolution process here, video.
When it becomes clear that a bank is failing, many things happen in a short amount of time. The bank's chartering authority, that is, the government entity that authorizes it to operate as a bank, generally gives it 90 days to take prompt corrective action. That is, to either recapitalize or sell itself to another bank. Financial regulators, including the chartering authority and the FDIC, prefer the banks succeed in this effort. But in case it doesn't, the FDIC uses that same 90-day period to make plans and be ready to implement the resolution process. This involves managing the closing and sale of the bank's operations to another bank. The FDIC has three main goals for any resolution. 1. Keep its promise to insured depositors. 2. Minimize disruption to bank customers and the local community. And 3. Resolve the bank at the least cost to the Deposit Insurance Fund. Here's how the FDIC makes that happen. First, a team of experts analyzes and assesses the financial condition of the failing bank and estimates.
Anytime you hear a team of experts, they might be good, but just beware. That always makes me think you're a team of mysterious experts from Harvard will come in and solve all your problems. All right, sorry, I didn't hear.
The liquidation value of balance sheet assets. The FDIC looks at many other factors, such as the asset and liability mix, market area competitive and economic conditions, prior resolutions in the same market, the bank's branch structure, and business focus. Using this information, the FDIC builds a marketing plan, identifies potential buyers, decides which assets to include in the sale, and how best to structure the transaction. When the 90 days are up, if the failing bank has not found new funding or a new buyer, the state or federal chartering authority makes the decision to close the bank and sets a closing date, which is kept confidential. Now the resolution plan goes into action. Qualified bidders are asked if they are interested. Only banks with good ratings, adequate size, and regulatory approval are invited to bid. Private investor groups may also bid. Besides adequate funding, they must be in the final stages of obtaining a charter. Interested bidders who sign confidentiality agreements are given secure access to information about the failed bank and the type of transactions being offered. They may also visit the failing bank. After this due diligence, they submit three-part bids. There's the premium on the deposits, the amount the bidder is willing to pay for the assets, and whether the bidder will assume all or only insured deposits. The FDIC is mandated to choose that bid that is best for the Deposit Insurance Fund. To do so, it compares all bids to one another, as well as to the baseline or liquidation value of all assets. This is the cost to the FDIC should it not be able to find a buyer. The best possible resolution is when all deposits are assumed and as many assets as possible are sold to the acquirer. That way, not only will depositors have uninterrupted access to their money, but also loans will be managed over time by the private sector to maximize potential recoveries. And costs are lower to the Deposit Insurance Fund and the FDIC. While the hope is always that troubled institutions will not fail, the FDIC stands ready to resolve them in the best possible way for all.
Okay, questions or comments on that video? I have to say, though, it was Alex Kincaid is who, did anybody know Alex? You knew Alex? Okay, yeah, he was baseballs, right? So, it was his mom that came and did it. So once she came and spoke, this is one government, quasi-government entity that seems to have their finger a little bit more on keeping private sector stuff. So I was impressed with what she brought to the table, and she showed these videos while we were here. So, all right, so that's FDIC. Let's see what do we got here. Yep, perfect. All right, so we did the camels. It's time for our exercise. Groups of 3 or 4. Minimum of 3, maximum of 4. Minimum of 3, maximum of 4. Oh my gosh, did I forget my stupid sheets? Okay. All right, I'm gonna get you guys, I gotta go run back. Let's see, let's start with, this one. I'll go down now. All right, let's see. All right, here you go. Read it and weep. Yeah. Okay, I just got to run to the office. You guys can time me. Give me a timer. Give me a timer. Ready? Get the sheet. Stay on your mark. I got to get the sheet. Excellent. Ready? But that's going to get you started. Start talking. Okay, time. Yeah, 17. That's really fun. Is that two? Two. Check the comments. Thank you. Okay, 33, standard 33. I know it is. You with these guys? All right, good. Yeah, I'm just gonna rewrite that.
Are we turning the notes or kind of continue to do
You can continue on your notebook. These are more for you guys. Making sure you know what you're doing for the.
Do you want owner's equity on this?
Your choice. Talk with your teammates there. Answer the question.
Well, my argument is it's just acidic. You're just saying how we don't worry about
I'm gonna go over it. stuff from the book to keep in mind. So we've got the leverage ratio that we mentioned. So you might want to calculate that ratio. Everybody should be calculating the leverage ratio. Then of course you need the balance sheet first. Part A is the balance sheet. Yes, you have your deposits like you have on liabilities, right? So the report is yours is part of that. It's just set aside. Oh, okay. So when you have your, and you did one out all and then so yeah, well, they're right. So their money. Well, start off with your balance sheet. So just do your basic that to balance first. Part B. Okay. So then again, it's asking how to capitalize. That sounds good. This one, leverage ratio is capitalized off, so that would make sense. So make sure you put together a decent balance sheet where things equal each other. I'm not seeing it on yours here. We got 130. Yeah. So balance sheet, you better have assets and liabilities equaling each other. One of your liabilities, is like owner's equity or whatever, we'll do a T account. So part A should have assets, liabilities, and then one of these is the capital, but these two sides need to balance out, hence the name balance sheet. What's the leverage ratio? So you take the liability side, so the 139, you take the original take capital. So it's over the 139. But
what time do you have 139 million?
no, if you got the video, it's good. As long as it balances out, that's the that takes a breathing. You're so.
I'll redo
No. Is that balancing? I don't see a balance. So I call it the balance sheet. Everything on this side is going to equal everything on this side. So you got, isn't it 139 million in deposits? So that's all your liability. Well, the 9 is the capital from the owners, but that belongs on this side too. So you got 139 total. 130, you're right, 130 deposits, and then the capital C.
The capital just goes under liabilities.
I haven't gotten to see it. I know this. Yeah, this is. Okay, now I look at 350 is no, that's it's not close.
I don't probably
Like you don't get.
Okay. So to be able to solve
Yeah, well, yeah. Which one's that risk? So, talk about it with your buddies. I want to make sure everybody's in the basics. I think it goes on.
State capital not by risk.
Yeah, it goes on past.
Yeah, but you have to assign. It still has the same. Because remember, I don't think it's that much percent. But it's not your level. Right, so on liability side, it's your account.
So, what do you got the basics of the balance sheet? Oh, it's the. I wish I would take your motorcycle classes. This is like years ago. Like I'm using it. So it's actually. It's like the business. Hey, no. So yeah, you want Okay, people, it looks like most of you got it. Hang on to that sheet for next week. We'll tackle the other one. You don't have to do it. We'll do it in class. But so here is what you're looking at for old hat. So I think most of you started doing that. So here's the balance sheet. 6.47 for the leverage ratio, 9 divided by the 139 for liabilities. Reserves have 0 weight. Why? Why is the 0 weight for reserves? How much risk is there? None. That's the whole point of the risk weighting, right? So reserves are just money that's sitting there available anytime, so there's no risk. So 64 million has the 0 weight. Residential mortgages have a 50% weight. 25 million at risk on the risk-weighted assets. Commercial loans are 100%. So we're going to put those at 100% level, which implies another 25 million in risk-weighted assets. So the risk-weighted assets is 50 mil. The risk-weighted capital ratio is 18%. See ya Thursday.